Let's analyze and fact-check sections of Joe Biden's first ever State of the Union. And maybe his only one, because he's pretty old. But first, a real nice hack is if you wait until it's almost over and then play it back at 1.5 or 2 times speed, then Joe Biden actually sounds like a normal human. Listen for yourself.
Good to be back. As Mitch and Chuck will understand, it's good to be almost home. Down the hall. Anyway, thank you all. Madam Speaker, Madam Vice President. No president has ever said those words from this podium. No president's ever said those words, and it's about time.
He also brought up his COVID relief plan, and according to him, that has already helped the economy and helped people.
100 days ago, America's house was on fire. We had to act. And thanks to the extraordinary leadership of Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Schumer, and the overwhelming support of the American people, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, we did act. Together we passed the American Rescue Plan, one of the most consequential rescue packages in American history.
So apparently, all that we needed to get out of the pandemic was for someone to spend roughly $2 trillion on some things that are loosely related to COVID. Also, what real leadership has Pelosi, ever provided? Other than, I suppose, getting her hair done in the middle of a pandemic and showing off her very expensive ice cream and her $2,000 freezers, what has she ever really done? I don't know. Pretty much nothing.
Promised we'd get 100 million COVID-19 vaccine shots into people's arms in 100 days. We will have provided over 220 million COVID shots in those 100 days.
And here Biden is once again trying to take credit for Trump's vaccine distribution plan. Now, I'm not going to say that Trump is completely responsible either, because there's plenty of other people. But Biden is trying to pretend that he inherited nothing, and somehow his 100 million vaccines in the first 100 days was ambitious, when it wasn't. Even Bloomberg had to admit that they were basically already meeting that goal before Biden ever took office. So why does he keep bringing that up as if it's something important? And yes, they exceeded it, but that was really easy to do considering it was already being done.
The economy created more than 1,300,000 new jobs in 100 days. More jobs in the first 100 days than any president on record. The International Monetary Fund is now estimating our economy will grow at a rate of more than 6% this year. That will be the fastest pace of economic growth in this country in nearly 4 decades.
Now, the easiest way to push back on this is to point out that the economy was artificially depressed. It wasn't a natural depression by any means. And The Guardian basically had to admit this in a fact check, saying that it's not clear how much credit Biden can take for this bounce back. It's largely just due to the reality that the country is reopening as more people get vaccines. So if you tell everyone they can't leave their homes for almost a year, and then you actually let them out of their homes and go back to work, obviously more people are going to work and the economy is going to be stimulated. It doesn't really have any impact if you spend $2 trillion. It was going to happen anyway. But that doesn't stop Joe Biden from wanting to spend even more money. He talked about his infrastructure plan a little bit, which was another way of spending $2 trillion, $2.2 trillion to be precise, even though only something like 24% of that entire bill has to do with infrastructure. So why it's called an infrastructure bill, I don't know, but it's not really about infrastructure if only 1/4 of the money you're spending goes to infrastructure. Now he's going to bring up the minimum wage to show that he really isn't a moderate anymore, and talk about the so-called gender pay gap that doesn't really exist, but Democrats like to pretend still does.
While you're thinking about sending things to my desk, let's raise the minimum wage to $15. We need to ensure greater equity and opportunity for women. And while we're doing this, let's get the Paycheck Fairness Act to my desk as well. Equal pay. It's been much too long.
And if you thought that JFK promising a moon landing was ambitious, wait till you hear what Joe Biden has in store for the next few years.
But so many of us have to see sons, daughters, and relatives who died of cancer. I can think of no more worthy investment. I know of nothing that is more bipartisan So let's end cancer as we know it. It's within our power. It's within our power to do it.
I didn't know that all we had to do to cure cancer was to elect President Biden and throw more money at cancer research. I mean, it's not as if they get billions of dollars every year already, so a little bit more money is certainly going to help. And here, Biden introduced yet another plan that he wants to implement, which is going to cost roughly $2 trillion.
We also need to make a once-in-a-generation investment in our families and our children. That's why I've introduced the American Families Plan tonight, which addresses 4 of the biggest challenges facing American families and in turn America. First is access to good education. 12 years is no longer enough today to compete with the rest of the world in the 21st century. That's why my American Families Plan guarantees 4 additional years of public education for every person in America.
So, if you're keeping track at home, we now have 3 Biden plans, all of them costing about $2 trillion, which is $6 trillion. On top of the already $4 trillion budget, that's roughly $10 trillion in 1 year, which is fairly close to half of the total federal budget we currently have. So if you think that blowing out the deficit dramatically more than any president has ever done is a good thing, well, you elected the right guy. But don't worry, I'm sure he has a plan to pay for it that we'll talk about in a little bit. And this, I want to push back a little bit because there seems to be this belief that we are dramatically undereducated in America. And I've talked about this multiple times. The fact of the matter is, we're not. We're overeducated. And you can check out my video where I talk about that at length. But all you have to do is consider the fact that when you look at those who have a bachelor's degree or a 4-year degree in every other country in the world, the United States ranks number 2, just behind Norway. So why exactly do we have to spend billions of dollars to get more people educated when we already have a very educated population? The second most educated population in the world, as a matter of fact. Now, that doesn't mean we're the smartest by any means, and I don't think sending more people to college will solve that because they're already going, but we are educated. We don't need to pretend that we're not. The problem is not how much schooling we're given, it's the quality of the schooling.
How do we pay for my jobs and family plan? I made it clear we can do it without increasing the deficits. Let's start with what I will not do. I will not impose any tax increase on people making less than $400,000.
Now, the way that he wants to pay for his $6 trillion plans is to raise taxes, because that's what Democrats want to do. Now, he's vowed to not raise taxes over anyone under $400,000. That's what you just heard. But that doesn't really make a ton of sense, because he has also vowed multiple times that he was going to repeal the Trump tax cut.
Well, guess what? First thing I do is going to repeal this Trump tax cut.
And believe it or not, most people making less than $400,000 actually got a tax cut in 2017. This is coming from the New York Times. So you know they really didn't want to say it, but they had to admit it. So it doesn't really make sense to say you won't raise taxes on anybody below $400,000, but at the same time, you're going to repeal the tax cut that they just got a few years earlier. I don't see how that makes sense.
That's why I've introduced the American Families Plan tonight.
And the family plan that he talked about in his State of the Union has a lot of policies similar to what you'd see in Denmark or Norway or these Scandinavian countries, which maybe you want a very strong and robust social safety net. Maybe that's something you like. And if that is, well, you can vote for that. But the fact of the matter is, you cannot have Scandinavian-style social safety nets without Scandinavian-style taxes. It doesn't work like that. And in Denmark, you have people paying taxes are something like 56% of their income. So if you want to pay 56% in taxes, well, go ahead. Joe Biden is going to help you do that. Even though he says he's not, if he really wants to cut the deficit and somehow match his spending, he's going to have to raise taxes on everybody. Now in the next clip, just watch how much of a delay there is between when Biden stops talking and when people finally stand up.
The vast majority of men and women wearing a uniform and a badge serve our communities, and they serve them honorably. I know them. I know they want...
And the reason I brought up that delay is because I think it's funny that now Joe Biden is talking about how cops are the good guys, and the Democrats need to think if they actually want to stand and applaud that. because a lot of them are running on the platform of defunding police, and you can't really say, let's defund the police, but at the same time, cops are also good guys. It doesn't make sense, which is why they were like, I don't know what to do here. Are cops good now? Apparently they are. Now this is the last clip I want to show, and I'm highlighting it because I think it's very indicative of the Democratic mindset right now.
We've stared into the abyss of insurrection and autocracy, pandemic and pain, and we, the people, did not flinch. At the very moment our adversaries were certain we'd pull apart and fail, we came together, we united. With light and hope, we summoned a new strength, new resolve.
Now, there's nothing inherently wrong about what he said necessarily. I mean, he mentioned the pandemic multiple times. He talked about the Capitol riot a couple of times. And that makes sense because those are pretty big things that already happened. It's expected. But he said really nothing about the $2 billion in damages that we saw over the past year. Or the fact that these George Floyd riots, or Black Lives Matter riots, whatever you want to call them, are still occurring on an almost daily basis in our country. So if you're going to talk about unrest, you're going to talk about violence, you can't really omit those things. They're pretty big deals, but I don't think Biden really talked about it at all. I mean, sure, he talked about George Floyd and systemic racism, but I don't think he ever talked about the riots that ensued. And they were very damaging riots, make no mistake. So after watching this entire thing, and again, I watched it on 1.5 or 2 times speed because I didn't actually want to waste my entire night listening to this crap. I think State of the Unions are stupid. I have a few take-home points. The first one is that Joe Biden is not a moderate. He really isn't. You can't listen to this speech and pretend that he is somehow a moderate, even though that's what he ran on. When he's talking about things like $15 minimum wage, free childcare for everybody, let's give free college to people, all of these things are not moderate proposals. And you know they're not because Bernie Sanders was loving all of it. So that means that they're not moderate proposals at all. He ran as a moderate, but he is not a moderate. He just isn't. Another thing is that I really don't like State of the Unions. I don't. I think they're stupid. And I know I watched it and I'm talking about it now, but when everyone just stands up time after time and they clap like, oh, this is so wonderful, it makes me feel like I'm watching a really horrible award show for some reason. And I just don't like it. So I hope you appreciate that I put myself through this. So hopefully you don't. But once again, if you choose to actually watch the whole thing, just put it on 1.5 or more speed. And it'll go by a lot faster, and Biden will actually sound like he's coherent and that he knows what he's talking about. And that's my last point here. That is that while I recognize that Joe Biden is kind of losing it, I think that Republicans sometimes play that up a little bit too much. And so when he has a good night like this, it makes it seem like all of that never happened. Now, it certainly did, and he tripped while trying to get up onto Air Force One multiple times just a few weeks ago. But we also need to recognize that when it comes to him being on script, he tends to do a pretty good job. I'm just saying be wary of how hard you push that, because someone watching this tonight who's a Democrat, they would say that all of that is just misinformation or disinformation and it didn't happen. So just be aware of that. Those are my takeaways from the State of the Union tonight. Did you watch it? If you did, what did you think about it? Or what do you think about the clips that I showed you? Let me know in the comment section down below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't, because I'd really appreciate it. I'm trying to grow my channel, and subscribing is one of the best things you can do, as well as commenting and leaving a like. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.